If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what is the creepiest true glitch in the Matrix, paranormal story you have? While in middle school, I watched my grandparents' house with my mom while they were on vacation. Hot day, out in the front yard washing my woodpecker Honda mountain bike, 'cause I'm 14 in the shit. Grandparents live in a cul-de-sac. This little black girl, maybe 8 to 12 years old, walks down the hill into the cul-de-sac in a pretty but plain white dress, barefoot, only looking straight ahead. I don't pay too much attention, but I also keep watching. She gets closer to my grandparents' driveway, and I stop washing my bike. I get a weird feeling. She walks straight up the driveway, doesn't even look near me, walks into the open garage, and disappears around the corner. I run after her. All the doors and windows were open, and my mom was cleaning the house. I asked where the girl went and got a crazy look. Mom had no idea what I was talking about. The backyard is fenced, so she couldn't have gone anywhere but back out front. To this day, I have no idea if it was a ghost or what. I think about it a lot. Back when I was 18, my best friend and I were riding our bikes through the suburbs late at night. We were riding from the beach back to my house, which goes, beach, car park, main road, houses, park, houses, my house. We had just crossed the first section of houses, then the pond, and then we had just started crossing through the second bunch of houses when we experienced a mother-ducking time warp back to the footpath that ran adjacent to the start of the first section of houses. I'm not religious, but I'm pretty adamant that Jesus ducking Christ himself picked us up like chess pieces and put us there. We'd been riding side by side, but in silence until then. Then I said something along the lines of "Holy shit, did you feel that?" To which he responded yes and explained the exact same feeling as I had before I explained it to him. It still weirds me out so hard to this day. It was like 4 in the morning, and I was quite the night owl, so I headed downstairs to grab something to drink. The kitchen is separated from the living room by a dividing wall, but I realize someone is in there because I can see a person's shadow from around the corner. I think to myself, oh, my roommate must be up already. Maybe he has something to do. So as I turn the corner, I say, "Hey, good morning," and immediately feel like an idiot and get a chill up my spine because no one is in the kitchen besides me. I search the entire first floor of the house frantically, and no one is there. So I head back upstairs and knock on my roommate's door. There was no answer, so I slowly open the door. Roommate is passed out asleep and doesn't seem like he is waking up anytime soon. There is no way he could have made it back up to his room that fast without running, and I would have noticed because the floors are creaky, especially on the staircase. When he woke up in the morning, I told him about what had happened. His eyes got really wide, and he turned pale. He looked me right in the eye and said, "That isn't a funny joke, don't duck with me." It turns out he had been having bad dreams all night about someone being in the house who shouldn't have been, but whenever he confronted the person, he could never see their face, all that was there was a black silhouette. We haven't had that experience since, and we agree not to talk to each other about it. A couple of weeks ago, my dog Coda came into my room and started to try to jump on my bed. Which she was successful in doing after a couple of tries, and I gave her a little nudge too, get off my bed. She jumped down and left. Then I heard my phone downstairs, so I walked down and got a call from my grandma, who said she had made some food. So I said okay, I will stop by and come eat. I get my jacket on and get ready to leave. I get my keys and grab my dog's leash to take her. We got in the car and drove for about 10 minutes, then arrived. I was eating and talking to my grandma about things. But when I was getting ready to leave, I couldn't find Coda. I searched everywhere in the backyard and the front outside, nowhere to be found. After a good hour of searching my grandma's neighborhood, it started to get dark. It was about 9:30-ish, so I decided to come back and check. The next day, I left and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up because I heard something downstairs. To my surprise, it was my dog, and at that point, I thought, wait, what? Later, I came back to my grandma to tell her I had found my dog. As soon as I arrived, I told her. After I told her about how Coda was home, I thought to myself, did I even bring her? I asked my grandma, and she said yes, I did because I left the leash in her living room. I then asked my grandma to watch her footage on her cameras from last night, and there was no footage of the Coda in the street or leaving the front door. But there was footage of her entering the house with me. I went home later, but Coda was still there, and to this day, I still don't know what happened. I was probably about 14 to 15 when this happened. I'm done with school for the day and have tennis practice right after, so I'm walking outside on my bike. At the school exit or entrance, I pass a person entering the building. There was absolutely nothing special about the appearance of that person, but for some reason we locked eyes, and I felt uneasy. It's hard to explain, but he was so average in appearance that he actually stood out to me. Anyway, I get on my bike and start pedaling fast because I'm running late. 1.5 kilometers later, I'm on a straight sidewalk, and I see a figure in the distance walking towards me. Sure enough, it's Mr. Average staring at me. There is no way he was able to get there before me on my bike in such a short time. I used all the shortcuts and was going pretty fast, so even if he left the school in a hurry in a car, he wouldn't have made it this far. I pass him again, and about 5 to 10 seconds later, I decide to stop and turn around to look at him one more time, but Mr. Average has completely vanished. To this day, I remember everything about that encounter clearly, since it seriously freaked me out. I visited my hometown after 15 years. I went directly to my childhood friend's home. It was locked. I thought he was out or something, but as soon as I turned, he was standing right behind me. We hugged, and time ensued. He asked me to come inside after he unlocked the door. His house was spooky. Things were broken, furniture was covered and dusty. I said, "What's up with this shit?" And he told me he didn't have time for it as he was busy. I didn't care, really. I just wanted to catch up on all the shit from our childhood. We talked about everything from childhood to adulthood. After a few hours, I told him I'd be going to my cousin's home to stay the night. He insisted that I stay the night, but I didn't really want to spend the night in the house as it was too spooky. So, he told me to come back here tomorrow, and I said I definitely would. Bid him goodbye. I went to my cousin's house. Lovely couple with 2 kids. At dinner, I told them about my friend and his house. They looked at me with terror and disbelief. My cousin said something like "Don't duck with us," and I was surprised as to why he would say that. They told me that the friend had died in a car accident 10 years ago. His parents and family had moved somewhere else, and the house has been locked since. I have no idea what the duck happened. I was shitting bricks. To this day, I don't know if it was a dream or a reality. But, still, I'm just glad that my friend, or ghost, or my imagination, caught up with me. There is a park that I regularly visit and walk through. I walk the same trails every week, so I've gotten into the habit of mindlessly walking and not really paying attention to my surroundings like I did when I first walked the trails. About 2 months ago, on my usual walk, I came across an old woman facing away from me on a bench on the outside of the trail. Maybe 30 feet away from me. In that moment, I acknowledged her, and nothing seemed odd. I found myself thinking about this bench and spot later in the day. I had never seen either before, but I could swear I had walked my usual trail. I've been determined to find this spot and have been going back for weeks, searching. I found nothing. Now, when I think back to seeing her, there was a very still or frozen feeling that I can't really explain. I just have no idea what this could have been. Driving home one day after work. Rural road, 2-lane with no median. It is winter, and the sun has already set. It was fairly dark outside. Come up to the stop sign at a 4-way stop that I've seen hundreds of times on my way home, illuminated by my headlights. I came to a complete stop. I looked down at my dash and looked back up, and I'm 200 plus yards away from the stop sign, and I can barely even see it in the darkness and distance. I'm just stopped in the middle of the road, nowhere near the stop sign. I pulled over to the side to figure out what the heck just happened and if I'm having a stroke or something. I caught my composure and drove home. I skied past a guy who said my full name. Not like he was calling me, but like you would if you were keeping track of people as they went by. He was dressed unusually. I stopped, but I was around the corner from him, and I assumed he would come down soon because it was his last run. Then the ski patrol came down and said I had to keep going. I said, "I'm waiting for that guy in the retro outfit to come down," and they said I was the last one down. I took off my skies and walked up. They followed. No one was there. I was so sure they sent another group down and even checked the forest to the sides to see if he had gone cross country. No one. The forest on both sides met trails that I could see from the bottom, so he didn't shortcut. He just vanished. This happened many years ago. I was a teenager hanging out with my brother and friend. We lived in a rural area. We got bored as teenagers do, and we decided to ride out bikes through a wooded area to check out a nearby stream. Heavy rain had passed through earlier in the day, so we were curious to see if the stream was fast flowing. We got to the stream, there was nothing too exciting there, and we chilled for a few hours. In the afternoon, we decided to head back. My brother and friend jumped on their bikes and started riding ahead of me. I got onto my bike and had a strange feeling like I was being watched. I scanned the trees surrounding me when suddenly someone leaned out to the side of a large tree no more than 25 feet away from me. This person had a big grin on their face. Most importantly, this person was me. I was staring at another me grinning at me from behind a tree. I was frozen. I wanted to yell, but I was so confused and terrified that no words would come out. I remember the terrible feeling of dread that washed over me. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, and the apparition had vanished. I drove hell for leather back home, and I don't think I slept for a week. I went back to the stream a few more times in my youth with my friends, and nothing like this ever happened again. The logical part of my brain wants to say that my eyes were playing tricks on me that day, but the part that remembers what happened, how clear it was, and the feeling of absolute terror and confusion will never let me just push this memory aside. When I was a teenager, I worked night shifts as a stocker in a grocery store. Because I was odd and the job was about 30 minutes from home in a metropolitan area, I would take different routes to and from work. One night in the summer, on my way into work, I came around a curve. It was dark, and there was mist in this low-lying area. As I drove past a field I have been to literally dozens of times, I saw a Grim Reaper. Black outfit, holding a scythe, just watching me come around the curve. It was standing in a field, next to a driveway. One arm was raised, like it was leaning on the erect scythe for support. I couldn't see a face, but I knew it was watching me. I slowed down, very weirded out. There was nothing in this field that could have been a trick of the shadows. No trees, no posts, no fences. I watched as long as I could until I went around another bend. I was freaked out. When I got to work, I called my best friend and told him that if I died, I needed someone to know what happened. I did not die that night. A couple of weeks later, I was heading home from work and pretty much forgot about the incident. I hadn't slept for 3 days, stupidity of youth, and was excited for a day off. It was early morning, and I took the route I had seen the Reaper on. Less than a mile from my house was my last memory. I awoke in a hospital bed, with my father at the foot of the bed. He asked if I remembered anything. I didn't. He told me I had been in an accident and died, but the doctors had brought me back and saved me. The next day, my best friend was visiting me, and he asked me what route I had taken home. When I told him, he asked if that was the road I had seen death on. Shocked, I said it was, and my worldview was forever changed. On Friday, 13th, 2000, my baby arrived early. He was 3 weeks early. As I was being driven to the hospital under the light of a full moon and empty roads, I went past a nasty car crash. Arrived at the hospital and marched straight to the delivery suite. During the labor, I saw a vision or ghost of my ex-boyfriend before the father. We had been split apart by his ex-wife blackmailing him with contact information for his kids, so he went back to her for their sake. He was crying, saying he loved me and he loved his boys. I kept pushing the midwife out of the way so I could see him. I delivered it naturally and put it down to endorphins. 6 months later, I saw one of my ex-friends on the street and asked after him. She just said, "Didn't you hear? Hess dead." I called the register of births and deaths, and they gave me quite a lot of information. It was him in the crash. He had been decapitated and thrown from the vehicle, a Jeep. The mortuary he was taken to was directly below the delivery suite. To confirm this, I took my baby and searched the cemetery. I found his grave with the date October 13th, 2000 on it. My baby would not stop crying as soon as we found it. I used to tend his grave until I moved too far away. Don't ask me what it means, circle of life, maybe? Too much of a coincidence. It's been over 20 years since the incident, and I can't explain it using conventional sense or rational thought. Here goes. I grew up in rural Wisconsin, the kind of place where getting a gallon of milk from the store was a 45-minute affair. My friends and I were 16 and 17 at the time, and so we decided to pass the time by doing what most kids our age did, long drives in the country. One Friday night, 5 of us decided to cruise around in my buddy's car. He drove, I sat shotgun, and 3 of our other friends sat in the back seat. I remember the night being really brightly lit by the moon, and because it was spring and the crops hadn't started growing yet, you could see for miles in every direction, especially given how flat our area was. Anyway, it's like 11 p.m., and we are heading eastbound towards an intersection on one of the county roads when we see headlights from a car heading north towards the same intersection. As we get closer to the intersection, probably a mile or so out, it looks like we are a bit closer to it than this other car. We get to about a quarter mile out from the intersection and see that we're definitely closer, so we can just keep going. Suddenly, this car guns it like it's trying to beat us to the intersection even though they had a stop sign and we didn't. As we get into the intersection, this car is right there, and its headlights are filling our car with light. You can hear the engine going, and it's clear as day that it's about to T-bone our car's passenger side, where I'm sitting. All 5 of us scream and brace for impact, and right when the car is going to hit us, it just vanishes. We slam on the brakes, all get out of the car, and we're doing the pat ourselves down for damage thing, but this car is just not there. Again, it's bright as hell, for night, and we're surrounded by flat, empty fields. There's absolutely nowhere for this car to have gone without us seeing it. It's just gone. We had a bit of a freak out and decided to head home for the night, but all 5 of us saw it. We even asked each other Monday at school, did that happen? And we all knew it had. What's craziest about this, though, is that the following Friday night, my friends decide to go for another drive. I had to work that night, so I couldn't make it, but the rest of them are just cruising the same stretch of country. Except this time, right around 11 o'clock, they get broadsided by a drunk driver at the exact ducking intersection. It's a catastrophic crash. Miraculously, everyone survived, but 2 of my friends needed extensive surgery. One of my friends, the one sitting shotgun, had to relearn how to walk and tie his shoes and suffered a pretty severe brain injury. What the hell was it? A time loop? A glitch in the matrix? Converging realities? Am I dead? I have tried and tried, but I do not have a rational answer for what happened. I had a strange experience that I've always wondered about. This happened when I was a kid, but I honestly can't remember what age. I know I was older, so 10 to 12, I think. My entire life, I've never slept through the night. I always wake up every 2 to 3 hours to this day. This is due to PTSD when I was little. As a kid, nighttime was the only time I felt I could completely relax and breathe. I dreaded the start of the next day. So being awake at night was my way of making it last. One particular night, I laid down on my bed with my street clothes still on and the lights still on. It wasn't late. In the blink of an eye, it was morning. It seemed like I just blinked, and it was morning. It was not like I fell asleep. I was so upset and confused. I cried. I panicked. I was so distraught. My light was still on, which was strange because my mother would never let me keep my light on after a certain hour. I was still in bed in my street clothes. I had a full-on anxiety attack. I couldn't have fallen asleep. It was literally just a blink. I'm 40 now, and still to this day, I have never slept through the night. I'm terrified to what happened. This is something I've always been baffled about and can't really explain. I used to work some half an hour away from home, and to commute to and from work, I had to drive through rural Scotland. Pitch black roads, isolated areas, you get the idea. I finished work at 11 p.m. and was heading home down a particularly long, very dark road. No houses are around. My headlights reflected on something's eyes, and I assumed it was a fox or deer. It is not unusual in that area. However, when I drove closer, I saw it was a collie dog sitting by the side of the road with a man. The 2 of them were just motionless, staring down the road, and neither reacted to my passing. The man had no light, no torch, there was no way he could have seen anything after I passed. He was just standing in the dark. If this was rational, what was he doing there? And with the dog? With no torch? It wasn't even like he did have a light, but he put it away when he saw me coming. The road was fairly straight, so I would have seen the light some way away. And why were they just going nowhere? The whole thing was a mystery. My older sister and I were walking through the woods on an island formed where this river forked and then joined back together. The island is roughly half-mile long and has quite a large, overgrown cottonwood forest on it. It was very peaceful and meditative. I spent much of my childhood scampering all over it. I never had any strange experiences, just a very soothing and wonderful place. This particular day, however, was somewhat different. The weather was perfectly beautiful, with golden sunshine filtering through the trees. We were calmly walking through the woods when I felt what I can only describe as a figurative tug in the center of my chest. It felt like a fishing line was hooked into my heart, and I had little choice but to walk in the direction I felt it was leading. At this time in my life, I was far more open to spiritual and supernatural experiences, so I know I was far more likely to believe what I was feeling. My sister noticed the change in my focus and behavior and asked if I was okay. It was as if I could not speak or think, only follow this feeling in my chest. My sister knew something was up and followed along. I kept following this feeling, this tug, into the cottonwoods, where the trees were closer together. The feeling was so odd, I felt completely captivated. I did not want to feel or follow anything else. As we went further along, I felt that whatever this was leading towards an opening between 2 trees that had grown and arched together over a dry stream bed. I know, typically, a natural doorway. As I walked closer, this feeling of joy, awe, and just happiness grew and grew. As my sister and I stepped through the trees into this dry creekbed clearing, the tug stopped. Instead, it was as if the light itself became more real. Golden and rich, as if you could now touch and feel it. Outside noise faded away, I felt as if time had stopped. It was the same forest, but completely different. As she and I are standing there, silent and soaking this in, I see something black, 2 feet tall, dash across the clearing. Either this thing came from behind one tree and disappeared behind another, but I'll be damned if it didn't look like it came from under one tree and dove under another. Either way, I only got the quickest look. But I had never seen anything like it in these woods before, or after, for that matter. Shortly after this, both my sister and I noticed that this feeling and this change in the world around us faded away. In a few seconds, it was clear we were standing in the same forest as before, nothing different from the last 100 times we had walked there. We walked home in silence, as we both felt something profound. This has happened several times when hiking in a specific, general area, around 10,000 acres, in New Hampshire, U.S. Looking at my watch or noticing the position of the sun in the sky, it's hours later in the day than it should be. I can't explain the lost time. This area was settled by Abenaki in ancient times. There is at least one artifact, a bowl carved in a rock ledge near a waterfall, that was recorded by archaeologists. An Indian trail is shown on old maps. I have found petroglyphs, I suspect, graves, and other things. The area was settled by Europeans for a time, but they all left or died. There are only cellar holes and cemeteries now. It's all gone back to the woods. There is a lot of iron in the bedrock. Compasses don't always work right. It seems to me that lightning hits some of the hills much more often than is typical, though I'm not any kind of expert in that field. I am experienced in hiking and camping in the woods. The amount of lightning scars on trees is crazy, in my opinion. I don't drink or use drugs. I have never lost time anywhere else. 10 years ago, my cousin and I went on a road trip from Louisiana to California. I'm a smoker and used to have the horrible habit of flicking my cigarettes out the car window. The trip was amazing. We only camped and checked to find campgrounds, and if it was cool, we would stay a night or two. So we reached Cali, and the next day we go north to see the giant sequoia forest. It was the most magical place I'd ever seen. There are very few gas stations where we were. So we're driving through the redwood forest, and all the tree needles were rusty, reddish. In my dumb brain, I was like, oh, that's why they are called redwoods. We passed a few forest fire signs, and I wasn't putting it together that the trees were actually burned from a fire. I started looking for my cigs, but nowhere. We unpacked for the night, and I tore the car apart. For 2.5 days, I couldn't find them. I tore everything apart so many times. There were no stores, so yeah. When we finally left that area, we passed a fire warning sign that was set to low as opposed to the very high we had been previously passing. So I see the sign, and it reminds me of my cigs. I look down and right between my feet on the floorboard, and there they are. It was like something didn't want me smoking back there because I may have absent-mindedly flicked it out my window. So everyone, last year in January, my mother and I and other family members of my mom's side, 4 uncles, 4 aunts, and countless younger cousins, it was but a fun day of sledding in the snow on a hill. As usual, we started making a fire to warm as the sun had started setting. With my hot chocolate in hand, I looked at the sunset, getting ready to take a picture of the sun setting, until my mother and I noticed a section of trees getting shrouded in fog. When I moved my phone, we still saw it in the 20 seconds of our silence. We often joke a lot. My aunts and uncles have looked over it and seen it too. Then a light started shining. It was a bright, clear light, and after a minute or two, we started conversing about what the fog was and what the strange light was. There are no roads where the light is across the lake. It's winter, there can't be that heavy fog there, right? And our last question was, what is the light? And after we turned our backs to answer a call related to what we just saw to another family member, an uncle of mine, and when we looked back, the fog was gone and light suddenly gone out, and the trees were back like they were before the fog appeared. After that, we packed up, all feeling uneasy about the younger cousins not seeing what was going on, and we didn't talk about that until we got to one of my aunts and uncles' houses for the night, and ultimately everyone agreed we had seen it and that we should not talk about it. To this day, me and my mom will randomly talk about what we think it was. I can only say it was unsettling and definitely a glitch in the matrix. Way back in 2004, I was living with a friend in England. We used to go walking in the countryside, out in the fields and all that. One time we were out walking, we saw a mini forest type thing towards the edge of a field. Curious, we went over to it. As we approached, we noticed a little pathway or gap in the trees, so we followed it. As we went along through the trees, the pathway became like an archway, as if the trees were growing into the perfect shape over the path. This went on for ages, maybe half an hour. Eventually we saw daylight at the end, so we powered on along and made it out of the exit into open air. Outside looked normal, countryside, with the exception of a strange settlement before us. It looked like the buildings were made out of junk, well, wooden junk. There were tiny people, 4 feet, maybe 5 feet max, always wearing rags. They were all muddy and unkempt. They stared at my friend, and I felt like we were aliens from another world. There wasn't a road, just a muddy path through the center of the buildings. No power lines. Nothing modern. While standing there, I suddenly had this feeling that I had to leave. I said to my friend that we had better go, so we went back the way we came. It was a pity this happened in 2004, since we didn't have the tech to handle everything easily that you'd have nowadays to take photos and videos of everything. Anyway, we went back and discussed it a few times in the intervening months. Eventually I couldn't stand it anymore and convinced my friend we had to go back with a digital camera. When we returned, we found the trees and the entrance, but when we followed the path, it lasted a few minutes and we emerged into another field. A normal field. We walked the perimeter of the trees, which turned out to be just a little square of undeveloped or unused land in the middle of 4 fields. No archway. No village. Suffice it to say there was no point in taking photos. I'm convinced to this day that if we hadn't left when we did, we'd still be there, wherever or whenever there is, to this day. Another missing person was reported. I live in rural Michigan, where hunting and fishing are an everyday part of life for a lot of people. I've been a very active outdoorsman, hunter, fisher, and just general walk in the woodser for a large majority of my 26 years. There are very few situations out in the woods I'm uncomfortable with, but this is definitely one of them. It was mid-August, which is when most people begin to scout new hunting spots before the October deer season. I had started to take a look at some public hunting land online and eventually found an area I wanted to go check out. Cell phone/GPS service is usually non-existent when going into these places, so I mapped out where I would go by looking at the GPS beforehand. There were a few distinctive landmarks that would make it easy to find my way out there. Follow the river to the first clearing, face west, and walk until you hit the pine tree line. Simple enough. I get to the parking area, check my cell phone, which has no service, load up my backpack with water and survival supplies for worst-case scenarios, and get on my way. Down into the valley, cross the creek, walk up the hill on the other side, and I find the river to start following it. I begin to follow the river for approximately 20 minutes, sticking tight to it so as not to lose my way. This is where it gets weird. After 20 minutes of sticking tight to the river, I feel like it's taking longer than expected to get to the first clearing. I pull out my phone on the off chance that I have a signal and can check my location. No signal. Check the time. 4:12 p.m. I put my phone back in my pocket, look up, and suddenly I'm no longer standing by the river. I'm standing somewhere I've never seen, and the river is nowhere on sight. I'm staring at a no trespassing private property sign with a very unnerving feeling taking over. Check the phone at 4:12 p.m. Trying to remain as calm as possible because I have no ducking clue what just happened. Okay, locate the sun, figure out where you are, the river is to the east, head east. I'm panicking in my head at this point. What the duck happened? There's no way I walked that far off course. I was standing at the river, how did I get here? I eventually find my way back to the river and make the decision to continue on my walk to scout the area. I found the area I wanted to scout and made it back to my truck afterwards without issue. I still can't shake the feeling of what the duck happened out there. I get back home and begin to look at the area on internet. I find the bend on the river I stopped at, so I drop a pin and begin to search for where I ended up standing. 600 yards away. I had somehow wound up over a quarter mile away in the blink of an eye. No time had passed. It was as if someone or something had picked me up and dropped me off at a new location. There is no explanation, but that feeling is unescapable. A few weeks ago, my friend, let's say his name is Alex, and I were wandering around through a foresty park at around dusk. We got bored of just walking on the path, so we decided to just wander off and go exploring. We headed off the path and walked in a straight line for about an hour, never changing direction or turning back around. After a while, we saw that we were coming up to a clearing in the trees, so we hurried up to get there, because it was getting a little creepy. As we got closer to the clearing, we saw what we thought was a tree that fell down, but as we kept walking towards it, Alex suddenly said, "Holy SHT, dude, that's the bridge we walked across to get to the forest." I realized he was right, and we both just ran like hell to get out of there. So when I was younger, I lived in a cul-de-sac, with other families who all had kids my age. One night in the summer, we were all playing kickball out in the cove. It was twilight outside, so it was getting dark fast but still light enough to see the sky and all. Out of nowhere, we saw a massive bird in the sky. I'm not talking about an eagle or something, not common in my area anyway, but a huge bird with the wingspan of a Cessna. We all looked up and saw it, but nobody said anything. We eventually all went inside when it got dark, and no one brought it up. I saw one of the guys that was out there with me like 16 years ago recently, and when I asked if he remembered it, his eyes got huge, and he thought he had imagined that. Not me, but my dad was coming down the stairs at home and was calling for my dog, Katie. He hears a female voice reply, "I'm over here." When he rounds the corner, the stairs have a turn in them, and faces the source of the voice. My dog is there, looking expectantly at him. He was certain that it was me playing tricks on him, but he and the dog were the only ones home at the time. We still make fun of him for it, but he was so shaken by it. There've been other weird happenings with the dog, so maybe she's just haunted or something. My childhood home had a pretty large, old, broken down wooden barn or shed where we kept yard equipment, tools, and such. It was always a bit spooky, but one time when I was around 10 years old, I was inside the barn and thought I heard a voice call my name. It was unfamiliar, male, and gruff. I wasn't sure I even heard anything, but I walked the 100 feet or so back to the house and found my mom. I asked her if she had called me. She said no and asked why. I told her about the voice I thought I heard. She immediately got a scared look on her face, went and found my younger brother, and started praying with us, our Christian family, obviously, asking God to protect our home and family. After that, I asked my mom what was going on. She said right before I came and told her about the voice, my brother had come to her and said the same thing. Me and my friend went bike riding yesterday and entered a wildlife sanctuary. The road was narrow, and there were no signs of inhabitants. We sat in the middle of the road, smoking. It was dusk while I was returning. I think it was about 6:45 p.m. We turned on the headlights on our bikes. A narrow road and both sides big trees and deep forest. We were riding at a low speed, about 20 kilometers per hour. We saw a girl walking slowly ahead of us. She was about 20 meters away from us and wearing a radish full-sleeve outfit and straight hair. Look at this girl walking in this solitary place alone in this dark. Isn't it risky for her? What if someone rapes? My friend said. Yeah, it's risky, I said while feeling pity for her. Hey, did you not notice that we can't overtake her? He said this while accelerating his bike. I just realized that it gave me goosebumps, and I was dead scared. I too accelerated, and soon we were moving at 80 kilometers per hour. But the girl was ahead of us, walking slowly, no matter how fast we rode. My heart was beating first, and I couldn't even shift gear properly. My friend gestured for me to stop the bike, and we stopped. What the hell is this man? We are dead today, my friend murmured. The girl was still walking slowly. All of a sudden, she crooked the road in a blink of an eye, ran towards the forest, and disappeared. We started our bike, rode towards the town, and reached home after a while. I didn't really believe in ghosts earlier. I traveled a lot at night on a bike but never encountered such things. The sight of the girl walking slowly is still in my mind, and it doesn't really go away. In late September or early October 2000, my parents had just put in a separate building behind our house for my recording studio purposes, and just to get away from everyone should I need it. We had bought a Radio Shack intercom system if either of us needed to reach each other when I was out in the studio. One night, I was working on music and had headphones on, so I didn't hear my mom calling me on the intercom. I needed a restroom break and to grab a drink from the fridge, so I walked into the house. As soon as I hit the door, my mom came into the living room, angry as hell, and proceeded to inform me that if I ever did that again, she'd whip me from then to 2008 and back again. I honestly didn't know what she was talking about, but she didn't believe me. Finally, when I myself got angry and said some choice words or phrases of my own, she realized I had no clue what she was talking about. It turns out that while I was out working in the studio, she heard me screaming for help over and over outside her bedroom windows, where she was located at the time. By the time she checked out her windows and the doors and couldn't see me, she tried to reach me via intercom, which I didn't hear. She was getting herself ready to go look outside and come knock on the studio door as I walked through the door. She insisted it was my voice, no mistake about it, screaming and pleading for help outside the house. It wasn't the first time one or more of the family had witnessed strange activity, At that house or the previous house I grew up in from birth until I was around 11 to 12 years old. But we were both so freaked out by what happened. She watched me from the back door to quickly go out to the studio and make sure all of my equipment was turned off and the studio door was locked, and I ran back as quickly as I could back into the house so we could be together just in case that, or something worse, happened again. I still get chills every time I think about it. I used to ride my bike to school when I was a freshman in high school. One day after a heavy storm, I was riding my usual route through the parking lot of a local restaurant. I thought I saw some money on the ground, so I stopped and looked. First there was a $20, then another $20, some singles, a $5, and finally a $50. I was shaking as I picked up all the money and looked around to see if I was on a hidden camera show or something. I picked up my bike after shoving the money in my pocket and rode off to school. Later that day, when I got home, I counted all of my new loot and basked in my good fortune. Fast forward a few years, and I actually work at that restaurant now as a bartender. As a bartender at that particular restaurant, you get to take your cash tips home with you at the end of the night. So I had a particularly good night and figured I would go to the bar next door for a drink. As I'm leaving the bar, it's raining really hard, and I was fumbling with my key to my car when I finally got home, and passed right out of the long shift. I woke up the next morning to find that my earnings from the night before were missing. I figured I must have dropped them in the parking lot when I was fumbling with my keys. I went back to the parking lot and looked around, but to no avail. All in all, I lost, you guessed it, $2.20s, a $5, a couple singles, and a $50. After I got over the fact that I just lost about $100 due to my own stupidity, I was seriously weirded out at the idea that there may have been an infinite loop of me giving myself $100. As a teenager, I lived in a dead-end neighborhood, a mile into an expansive state forest in a rural Connecticut town with a lot of history and a supposedly haunted graveyard. This town had a lot of energy, and I had plenty of spooky little glitch experiences while living there, for instance, seeing movements in my peripheral vision. But the one big glitch, which I remember so vividly all this time later, happened on a cloudy, gray November afternoon when I decided to go on one of my many woods adventures. Usually I would do these excursions with neighborhood friends, but this day I was alone. I started out of my backyard and went straight into the woods to explore a section I was less familiar with. As I wandered deeper, the day became grayer and gloomier. The trees were bare or had a few crispy brown leaves barely clinging to their branches, and the air was cool, a typical New England November day in the woods. It was nearing dusk, but I pressed on, wanting to see how far I could get. Suddenly, I found myself stepping out of the gray, wintry woods onto an old, rutted dirt road with worn wheel tracks and humps of green grass. No longer cold and gray, it was sunny, the sky was clear and blue, and the trees were full of green leaves all along the trail. There was a gentle, warm breeze, it smelled like summer. I stopped, startled at the abrupt change, feeling as if I had just entered another world. It was so pleasant and inviting. I wasn't scared, it was so beautiful and peaceful. I felt this overwhelming urge to walk down the path and see where it would take me. But noting the time and knowing it was cold and dusky mere seconds before I stepped into this inexplicable sunshine, I decided I didn't have the time to explore this lush, tempting road, especially since doing so would change my direction, and I was concerned about getting disoriented and not being able to find my way home in what should have been the rapidly darkening evening. Instead, I decided to come back the next day with a friend. I turned around, stepped back off the trail into the chilly November gloom, and headed home via the same straight line I had plotted. I couldn't stop thinking about that place. It was so surreal and peaceful. It had no business being that green and sunny. The next day, I recruited a friend, determined to show her, but we couldn't find the trail. I never found it again, even though I remembered exactly how I got there and tried to find it several times after. I sometimes think back on that day, all those years ago, and wonder why it was there and what would have happened if I had decided to walk down that path. I was walking home from school in elementary school. I looked up, and the crosswalk lady was there along with the people who walked home on the same route. The crosswalk lady handed me some gum, which I pretended to eat, then threw it on the ground. Stranger danger, when I looked back up, everyone was gone. There was no crosswalk lady, no other children, and the gum I threw on the ground was gone, and it was dark out. I panicked and rushed to cross the street and get home, but when I crossed the street and looked back, it was light again, and everything was back to how it was before. I grew up in a small town with less than 200 people. The road my parents lived on had lots of hills, twists, and turns at several sharp angles. It was so bad that there was a sign on either end declaring large trucks not allowed. This took place at the top of a hill that had almost a 90-degree bend at its apex. Not to mention that it almost immediately started going down again and curving the other way to avoid a swamp. Anyway, this happened when I was in my late teens. I was coming home from work driving probably a little too fast for this back road, but I knew it like the back of my hand. As I was about to get to the top of this hill, an 18-wheeler came over the top on the wrong side of the road to be able to make the turn and smash straight into my car. In a single moment, it felt like forever. I felt the impact of being hit, of slamming into the steering wheel, of the windscreen glass slicing my face, and of heat as the engine exploded. Then suddenly, I was yanked out of my body, being carried by something I could not see or hear, telling me it was time to go if I wanted. In my head, I screamed out, I wasn't ready. I reached out my translucent hand and forced my exploded car and body back together over a mile further down the road, next to the old graveyard. Then, like nothing had happened, I was back in my body, driving past the old graveyard I was always warned about going into at night. I was fine. I went home. I climbed into bed and went to sleep, thinking it was all just a waking dream. The next morning, I found out from local news that an 18-wheeler had crashed into another car the night before and gone off the road. The other driver survived but was in critical condition. The weird thing was that they never found any of the wreckage from the other car. I am convinced to this day that I was the other car and was given a second chance at life by my guardian spirits. My soul went to bed ahead of me by about an hour. By the time I decided to call it a night, she was all the way asleep. I could hear her breathing. Heavier than normal breathing when someone is deep asleep. Due to this, I make sure to get into bed lightly so as not to wake her. I get situated and pull out my phone to browse. I turned my volume down very low in case a video autoplayed, so I wouldn't disturb her. We sleep with our own separate blankets. I learned early on that she would take the whole blanket with her if she moved around at night, and it was like fighting the fucking kraken to try to get some blanket back. Seriously, how can a woman have so much sleeping strength? I see her blanket. I see her. I hear her. I have my blanket on me, and I'm lying on my back. I was on phone for about 20 minutes before I put the phone down and rolled over to sleep. During this time, I was listening to her sleep breathing as a way to cool off. Suddenly, I got a cramp in my back and decided to stand up to try to work it out. Making sure not to disturb my so. I do some stretches next to the bed, and when I feel okay, I turn back to get back in the bed. She was gone, and her blanket was gone. Thinking what? I went to the living room, and she was asleep on the couch. I couldn't put together how she made it to the couch, and I still can't. I guess, in my surprise and trying to figure out what happened, I let out an audible "what the duck." She hears this, wakes up, and asks me if everything is okay. I just asked her when she came out of the living room to sleep on the couch. Apparently, she hasn't come to bed yet that night. I have indoor security cameras that are mostly pointed towards the front and back doors and living room area. I went back through the footage, and she was on the couch the whole night. I don't know what just happened. I'm wide awake now and cannot figure out how this happened. I could hear and see her sleeping. Next thing I know, she's no longer next to me. What? My wife, sister, and I are all avid backpackers. We spend a lot of time in the outdoors, but back in 2018-ish, we decided to do pull-up camping with stargazing in Colorado as the main goal. We are from the Midwest. We used a light pollution map to find a remote camping area in San Juan National Forest and planned to hike during the day and stargaze at night. The first day and night, the stars and trails were amazing, and we were all super stoked to be in the mountains and away from flat land. It was the clearest I have ever seen the Milky Way galaxy, and it was phenomenal. After the first night, we all got up early and decided to do another hike, this time following a small dirt forest road through the mountains. We were all having a great time, and there were nothing but positive vibes. I mentioned that our hike felt more like a walk since we were on a road, so we all agreed to take the first proper trail we came across. We had a GPS unit, map, and compass, so we weren't worried about getting lost. We finally came across a trail that ran perpendicular to the road and had a slight gradient, running down the mountain. Staying true to our word, we all agreed to see where it went and turned onto the trail. As soon as we left the road and stepped onto the trail, I had an unprovoked and overwhelming feeling of doom come over me. Suddenly, my excitement left me, and I felt, almost instinctually, that I would be in serious danger if I went down this trail. This unprovoked feeling of doom was strange enough, but when my sister said, "Guys, I don't think we should go down this trail," and my wife responded, "Oh my God, you feel that too?" I lost my shit. We quickly returned to the road and continued our walk. We all agreed we had the same unprovoked sensation once we stepped onto the trail and could not come up with any logical explanation. I have never experienced anything like this, and it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. I live in an 800-plus acre forest comprised mostly of research property owned by the University of Michigan. The property is crisscrossed by trails that are open to the public, and for as long as I can remember, I've spent a good deal of my free time at home exploring on and off the paths. I know the woods like the back of my hand, and I have always felt safe and at home in them. In the fall of 2016, I came home from college for a weekend to see my girlfriend at the time. The weather was nice, and that Saturday afternoon we decided to take a walk. There is a service road that runs up the center of the forest, providing access to a few small university properties. This was where we chose to take our walk. Towards the end of the road, the terrain on one side of the path slopes down into a bowl-like depression. This was where my girlfriend and I parted ways. I went down into the crater to snap some photos with my camera, and she went off the path in the other direction, investigating piles of field stones that had been left between the trees when the road was first laid years ago. I was down in the crater for maybe 3 minutes when I heard her call out from above me. I quickly climbed back up and found her on the same side of the path as me, jogging through the trees towards a thicker part of the woods. She looked genuinely shocked when she saw me and stopped dead in her tracks. She explained that while she was walking towards the crater to join me, she saw me standing in the path waiting for her. From her description, I was grinning playfully, and when she got close, I dashed away, teasing her as I ran deeper into the woods. She says I was wearing the same blue jacket, the same Aztec camera strap, and the same gray beanie. My face was unmistakable as well. I never saw this rascal with my own eyes, so naturally I'm pretty skeptical, but she seemed genuinely shaken, and to this day she stands by her story. I'm uncomfortable walking in the forest alone now, and I can't help but wonder where that girl would have ended up had she followed my lookalike on his jog through the woods. I was 14, sleeping in the sunroom at my parents' house. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. The room was dark, but you could see the silhouettes of things due to the moon outside. I just remember cracking open my eyes and seeing a large, hulking figure in the middle of the room, sort of crouched over. The room was big and mostly empty, so it stood out easily. I was half asleep, but as soon as I saw it, I bolted upright. Wide awake. Eyes wide open. I thought I was just seeing things or still dreaming, and it would go away. It didn't. It just stood there, hunched over, and didn't move. I bolted across the room to the light switch and kept my eyes on it the whole time. The second the lights came on, it was gone. Another time in that same room, I was sleeping in bed with my friend during a sleepover, and I woke up screaming at her. Like screaming as loud as possible. It was a night terror, but it freaked her out so badly that she had a panic attack. I had other weird instances there while sleeping. Later in life, I developed a sleepwalking problem. However, I've never experienced anything like seeing that figure. I swear I wasn't hallucinating.